Namaste, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bodha, the Dharmika view of everything. I'm Anshuman, and today we'll be talking about Christianity and its manifestations and its modus operandi of conversions in Andhra Pradesh. I'm joined by a young scholar from the US, Vivek Rallabandi. So, Vivek Rallabandi is a rising senior at Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania, USA, and he is double majoring in history and religious studies with a minor in public history. Vivek has recently worked on a paper called The Culture Question: The Conceptual Underpinnings of Christian Proselytization and Native Resistance in Modern Day Andhra Pradesh. Welcome, Vivek.
Namaste, namaste. Really glad to be here.
Really glad to have you on our show. On our program. So, Vivek, tell me something about this project, about this paper that you have penned on the Christian conversions in Andhra Pradesh, and how did it come about? What was your initial approach to it? What was the reason that you started writing on this topic and you chose this topic particularly? Just walk us through this journey of understanding, identifying the problem, and writing about it, and the
Yeah.
reactions that it has generated.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm very grateful to Bhārata for hosting me here. It's a pleasure to be here and be talking about a topic which is very close to my heart, which I'm very interested in. Um, so, my family is from Andhra Pradesh. I was born and raised here in the United States, but both my parents hail from Andhra Pradesh. So, I definitely have a personal connection to the topic. Um, but when I came to Gettysburg College initially, when I was in my first year of study at Gettysburg College, I actually happened to walk into the historic chapel on campus. It's a small church. And I saw a plaque in the church which basically said Gettysburg in India. And it had a cross, a Christian cross, blooming out of a lotus. And the lotus is obviously the national flower of India, symbol of India, right? So that sort of piqued my interest because I was like, what is this doing here? And it said it was memorializing, people from Gettysburg who had served in India. So my curiosity was piqued. I was like, what's going on? So I dug in. I went to the college archives. I started doing some research to kind of see what this was all about. And what I stumbled upon was the fact that from my institution, from Gettysburg College, there had been numerous missionaries who had, over the span of a century, they had graduated from Gettysburg College. Many of them had also graduated from the theological seminary, Lutheran Theological Seminary, also in Gettysburg. Gettysburg College is historically affiliated with the Lutheran Church, American Lutheran Church. And so they had done that. They had had their matriculation education here in the United States. And then they had gone on to India to serve as Lutheran missionaries, Christian missionaries. Now, where exactly in India were they serving? Now, the home base of the American Lutheran Church's operations in India was in a town known as Guntur, which is located in Andhra Pradesh state. That's actually near where my dad is from, in Andhra Pradesh. So it was fascinating because you had basically what I realized was that this institution, this predominantly white institution, Gettysburg College, that I had come to with really no knowledge of the fact that it had this connection to India and to my home state in India, I realized that there had been, about 20 missionaries, upwards of 20 missionaries who were affiliated with Gettysburg College who had gone starting from the 1830s all the way up till the 1980s. So about, over a span of 150 years there was a Gettysburg, presence in Guntur at one point or another over that, 150 years. So this was a fascinating discovery, really, that my ancestral homeland in India and the institution that I was in here in the United States had such a connection. And so I realized that I kind of put that at the back of my mind. I was like, wow, this is really interesting. I want to do something about it. And then in my junior year, I obtained an internship with my college's Special Collections and College Archives, the Glatfelter internship, which allowed me to pursue an independent college history related project. And so this was obviously the area of research that I chose, and I ended up creating a digital exhibit looking at the history of Gettysburg College missionaries in India. That was a fascinating project. And so this paper, I would say, sort of I guess serves as a sequel to that digital history project in the sense that that's more of a sort of taking a case study of a specific group of missionaries in Andhra Pradesh and what were they doing, what were their motivations, what were the challenges they faced, whatever. Um, I would say that this paper, so this is a capstone paper that I wrote for my major in religious studies. So it's sort of the culminating paper for the major. I wanted to look more so at the theoretical underpinnings of proselytization in Andhra Pradesh and sort of look at, okay, what are the concepts? What is the conceptual framework that this is actually predicated upon? And I think that was really the question that I set out to explore through writing this paper.
That's great. That's great. You mentioned that since the last 150 years, at least 20 missionaries have graduated from Gettysburg College who practiced in India. Is it still undergoing? Is it still a practice?
No, the last missionary was a man by the name of Samuel Schmidt-Henner, and he left in the mid 1980s. It's interesting you ask that question because the goal of the American Lutheran Church in India, in the way that they sort of went about their missionization efforts, was that they didn't want to be reliant on foreign missionaries forever. The goal was to transform the church into a native church, in the sense that the Indian church would be self-sustaining, and the native missionaries, meaning the Indian converts and the descendants of those converts, would be the ones that were doing the missionization. And there should be no need for foreign missionaries. This was the eventuality that they were aiming to achieve. And I think that by the 1980s, they had gotten to a point where they didn't really need foreign missionaries. And I think as part of a sort of, post-colonial paradigm, I would say, I think the native church was definitely, in their eyes, part of that, where it's like for Indians by Indians, but they had already sown the seeds for that over, a century and a half. So their work was well done by that point.
This actually harks back to the colonial consciousness of even Macaulay. Macaulay, who wrote the Ministry of Education, he had said he wants a class of Indians who are Indian in color and blood, but English in tastes. And from what you have just mentioned, even the missionaries had such an agenda that ultimately this cycle should be self-sustaining and Indian missionaries should go out.
Right.
Just
Absolutely.
coming to your paper, you have began the paper with a movie which talks about three girls from three different religions set in the rural space of Andhra Pradesh, where the Hindu girl realizes that she's tried upon by the Christian girl to be converted, while the Muslim girl refuses. The Hindu goes along with it, and then realizes a folly, and then finally comes back into the Hindu fold. So we have seen in recent times how deep the Christian arm has gone into Andhra Pradesh, and it even had a kind of a political agency backing it. So just walk us through what is the current situation in Andhra Pradesh, and what is the techniques for cultural appropriation that has been utilized by the church in Andhra Pradesh. Just walk us through that.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this short because I think this is what my entire paper is about. So I'll just try to give you a pretty sort of a bird's eye view of the situation. So the current situation, I would say, so the Christian presence in Andhra Pradesh is substantial, right? I mean, there's no two ways about that. And I think it's definitely more than whatever the official government figures have recorded.
Absolutely.
There's an interesting reason why. So over the course of the history of Christianity in Andhra Pradesh, the primary target of conversion have been sort of, the people at what are perceived to be the bottom echelons of society, right? In the sense, mainly sort of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes. These have been sort of the main targets for conversion. And the Lutherans realized this very quickly on. So the Gettysburg Lutherans, the American Lutherans in Guntur, who are sort of a microcosm of missionary strategies and how they went about doing things in Andhra Pradesh, because that's but one group. There were definitely others. There have been others. The Lutherans are certainly not the only ones. But it was sort of very much realized that, okay, these are the people that we can wean away very easily, because they have the most discontent potentially that can be exploited with the current state of affairs. So this was very much a divide and conquer sort of policy that they went about. And it was sort of, okay, then you work your way up the ladder progressively, but you start with those groups. And that had very much been, I would say, until the pretty, I would say maybe even the post-independence, maybe 1950s, 1960s, 70s, that was sort of, those were the primary groups. You were mainly targeting the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe sort of groups. And so because those have been the bulk of the converts to Christianity, the numbers are sort of belie the true reality, because of the fact that, according to the Constitution in 1950, the Constitution of India, if you want to retain your scheduled caste status, you have to be, either Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Sikh, whatever, but you can't be Christian or you can't be Muslim on paper, right? So otherwise you'll lose your scheduled caste benefits. You'll be treated as a backward caste, which still gets you some benefits, but not nearly as much as what the scheduled caste status would get you. So, and I talk about this, I believe, in my paper. So this creates this dichotomy where you're Hindu on paper. If I belong to a scheduled caste, for example, I am incentivized to remain Hindu on paper and to represent my faith as Hindu. But for all practical purposes, I'm Christian. I'll be baptized. I'll be married in the church. My children are raised in the church, whatever. But we're all Hindu on paper for legal purposes, so that we retain our benefits. So that I think is one aspect that needs to be considered when you're looking at, okay, what is the true scope of Christianity in the state of Andhra Pradesh? But the fact of the matter is that Christianity has not remained confined to sort of the quote unquote lower classes alone. There has been an effort to steadily sort of permeate all echelons of Indian society. And this is not necessarily entirely a new phenomenon either. So even in the early days, there was obviously a focus on the quote unquote lower classes, and they were the primary targets. But there was also a special sort of focus on converting the upper classes as well, the quote unquote upper classes. And I'm putting these things in quotes, not to sort of hierarchify them myself, but to sort of, I guess, represent what their view of, because they were taking a very calculated view of the social structure in India that they encountered at the time. So even very early on, like when the Lutherans were in Andhra Pradesh in during this period of time. So I remember reading about the fact that they converted a Brahmin, and this was, I think, near Rajahmundry in Andhra Pradesh, in that region. So this is like coastal Andhra Pradesh that I'm talking about, in the Godavari districts. And so they had converted a Brahmin, and he was apparently the contractor for some of the buildings that they were constructing, some of the mission buildings and whatever. And so they had converted him to Christianity, and it was a big thing for them. I remember seeing in one of the missionary books that they had published at the time, they had a full page photo of him, sort of dressed up in his Hindu garb. He was wearing his sacred thread, yajñopavitam, his tilakam, all of this stuff. So it was a prize catch for them, because it was basically that was what they wanted to represent, was that we got somebody from the top echelons of Hindu society. It was like that was a huge thing for them, that they thought, and that sort of represents kind of the fact that, okay, this is somebody that we got. It's a sort of credibility, sort of legitimization that will help you gain currency, gain traction with Hindus across the social spectrum, because of the sort of respect that individual they figured would command in society writ large. So the approach as of now has very much been, I think, it has started to steadily work its way up the ladder. And based on talking to people who are working on the ground, and I did one of the interviews that I did is mentioned there with Venkat Votukuri in my paper, who is working on the ground with a social welfare organization in Andhra Pradesh. He talks about this is not mentioned in the paper itself, but he talks about the fact that it has become sort of an economic thing as well, across sort of Varna lines, right? Where it's like, okay, if you're a poor Brahmin, even though historically it's like you might not have had, according to them, much of an incentive to convert, now sort of on an economic basis, that that's something that you can also be targeted. So I think they have sort of, at this point in time, broken the shackles in terms of being confined to one particular community, one particular Varna group, whatever. They've sort of saturated themselves, as according to what I've seen, among certain groups, with certain scheduled caste groups, where it's like they've reached almost 90%, whatever. So they've reached almost astronomical numbers among certain groups. So it's like, okay, well, now it's time to expand. It's time to sort of, and the thing is that the strategies that they've employed, which I'll talk about a little bit more as we go on, are not necessarily, the effectiveness is not confined to one group altogether. It's not that they're tailor-made for scheduled castes alone and it doesn't work for other groups. No, the tactics are of universal value, universal efficacy.
So, 2 points flow from that. One is that Christian conversions, even though they have been of the former uh, depressed classes as they have been classified by the colonialists, but even then, there is said to be sufficient resistance from them to convert. And in any scenario, if you see that one has to convert to an entirely alien ideology, there will be resistance. So my first question would be, then what did the church then specifically design, and how did they tailor made make their conversion tactic so that the classes whom they intend on converting actually don't feel that alienated when they leave their original religion and join the new religion?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question, right? And I think this is sort of at the heart of what I'm trying to talk about in my paper in terms of this dichotomy between culture and religion, right? Which they have tried, I think the missionaries and sort of the academic the academic work that has sort of, I guess, tacitly backed that approach has tried to dichotomize by saying, okay, religion and culture are separate and apart. And I talk about this in my paper. I use one scholar in particular, Chad Bauman, who critiques Swami Dayananda Saraswati. So Swami Dayananda Saraswati of Arshavidya Peetham here in the United States as well as in India, who has characterized conversion as a form of religious violence, right? And Chad Bauman basically takes issue with this, and he says, well, that position stems from a conflation of religion and culture, which are Swami Dayananda, according to him, sees them as sort of one and the same, or at least again congeals the two of them together. And he says, well, no, the two of these are sort of separate entities in the sense that you can sort of change religion without necessarily relinquishing your culture. And I think that very much kind of sums up what the missionary tactic or what the missionary kind of selling point is, right? That okay, you
Cultural
can change your
appropriation.
religion and you can still keep your culture. And I think that very much has been the missionary approach in Andhra Pradesh by and large, right? And I think what has been done is this, and I talk about this extensively in my paper, this effort to integrate Jesus Christ into the Hindu pantheon, right? To sort of bring him amongst the many Hindu gods. And the selling point again basically is, okay, well, you have all of these deities in your Hindu pantheon. You have so many. You have Rama, Krishna, Shiva. You have even more so guru like figures that you might be revering, such as Sai Baba or whoever your personal guru might be, within your guru parampara, within your own sampradaya. You have all of these people, right, within the Hindu pantheon. What what does it really hurt you to add one more, which is Jesus Christ to that? And so that very much kind of, I guess, goes to this point of Jesus Christ in the Hindu psyche, and how Jesus Christ has been integrated into the Hindu psyche as sort of this avatar, this guru sort of figure, who is very much kind of has the same identity as many other sorts of guru type figures, yogi type figures in the Hindu tradition. So he's been imbued with that identity by sort of the missionaries, by the church, and by Indian intellectuals during the colonial era, soon after the post-colonial era. And I talk about some of these people, such as the poet Chelam, who is a famous Telugu poet, who is Hindu by identity. Talk about him in my paper, how he talks about Jesus Christ as a jnani, right? So it's very explicitly a Hindu term that he's using. He's basically saying someone who is self-realized, someone who has basically, achieved a state of realization. He's attributing such a quality to Jesus Christ. So again, and I talk about that tendency. So why does sort of the Hindu psyche kind of go out of its way to sort of say, to validate Jesus and to say that, okay, this is somebody that can be kind of integrated within our faith. And I think I'll just read out a line from my paper that I think is very relevant here. I said that the irony, though, lies in the Hindu belief that the genuineness of Hindu tolerance is being mirrored by the proselytizing Abrahamic faiths, and that aggressive proselytization will be staved off by this mutual post-colonial understanding. And so basically, it's sort of a bargain. Okay, we're tolerant to you, you be tolerant to us in return, and then we can just kind of live happily ever after, right? I think this is the sort of the implicit sort of bargain that they have, I think, created, within their own mind. Sort of, this is the liberal Hindu psyche, I would say, or sort of the big tent Hindu psyche. I think what they failed to realize is that this is unfortunately not entirely a two-way street. That sort of within the Christian missionization strategy, the integration of Jesus Christ into the Hindu pantheon is merely an intermediate step. This is not sort of an eternal. You can't eternally be at that point, because at some point it's either Jesus or bust, right? It's either you embrace him wholeheartedly or you don't at all. And that, the anecdote that Venkat Vortukuri had shared with me in his interview, and he had mentioned that to me on a prior occasion as well, where so when he's working with vulnerable populations, with pregnant women in hospitals, people that are not necessarily maybe the best off economically, they're they're in hospitals, government hospitals, whatever, and so they're approached by Christian missionaries who say, you worship Jesus along with all of the other gods in your puja room, and just put his picture or whatever in your puja room along with all of the other deities that you worship, and he will ensure that you have a successful pregnancy, right? And so this goes one of two ways. If the pregnancy is successful, the missionary will come back and say, okay, well, your pregnancy was successful because of Jesus Christ, so you should worship him exclusively, right? Now, if the pregnancy fails and the woman miscarries, unfortunately, then the argument is, well, it failed because you didn't worship Jesus exclusively, and so if you had worshipped him exclusively, then it would have gone successfully. And so now you should shed the worship of all of your Hindu deities and you should worship Jesus alone. So this is kind of a situation, heads you win, heads I win, tails you lose, right? There's no getting out of this in a way that you're retaining your Hindu practices. So it's a very slippery slope, as I say in my paper, very slippery slope between saying that Jesus is a part of the Hindu pantheon, worthy of veneration, worthy of reverence, to saying that, okay, now you're worshiping Jesus alone, and the rest of your ancestral practices go out the window.
So they begin with just injecting this notion that you can worship Jesus along with your Hindu gods, and then as per the results, as you rightly said, heads I win, tails you lose. They will say ki if it worked well, then it was because of Jesus, and if it didn't, it was because of your works. That reminds me of the statement by Francis Xavier when he was setting out for India. He had said, "I want out and out pagans to deal with because they are easier to convert. They are mainly not well versed in our theology the way, say, Muslims are, because they being from the same school of thought, they understand conversion, proselytization, and how the game works. But Hindus, especially, and since we have not done that necessary Purva Paksha at a large scale, which Rajiv Malhotra talks about, understanding of the other, how they view you and how you should view them from your own system. This this problem mainly rises. Uh, so, Vivek, in your paper, mainly there's also a component of resistance, and you start with that, how the people who are just now awakening to that implicit aggression and conversion, and realizing that Christianity is not all saving and religion of love as it has been proclaimed to be, but it has that element of conversion and divorcing oneself from one's culture itself. So they are rising up and they are speaking against it. So can you just tell me about your conversations with them? What have they said and how they want Hindus to understand this problem in its depth?
Yeah, so the resistance was not the main sort of part of my paper. I was initially going to give it a more prominent spot, but I think that eventually the theoretical considerations were such that they dominated the bulk of my paper, and I didn't really have very much space to really even look at the resistance. So that's definitely a part two. That's definitely a sequel to be done at some point. And with respect to the resistance, I think there was one individual that I ended up interviewing, and that was someone who was working with tribal populations in Andhra Pradesh, and that was in the form of a written questionnaire, but I didn't end up incorporating that into my paper. So, but I can definitely talk to you about resistance, because that's something that I'm certainly aware of, sort of what is the resistance on the ground looking like. in Andhra Pradesh. And the resistance, I think, is very much, I guess, multifaceted. But I think one of the primary ways that resistance has been working has been obviously to um, try to bring back people back to the fold who have converted to Christianity, and say, again, probably in many cases, sort of through financial inducements, through whatever, taking advantage of them if they're sort of in a situation of difficulty, financial difficulty, or whatever. Um, and so they're sort of promised the moon, and then once they get in, they realize that, okay, this is, a lot of the promises that were made were dubious. But because, again, you make a clean break from culture, you are in a situation where it's sort of intractable. You can't necessarily get out
You're
because you've been
marooned.
cut off from really everything that you've been grounded in, that you are sort of have been familiar with your entire life. And so suddenly you're alienated from all of that. So it becomes very difficult to sort of return, because it's a bridge that's burned, and I think deliberately so in many cases. It's burned. So I think that's one of the facets of resistance, is sort of trying to facilitate the return of people who want to come back. Some people, obviously there's some discourse that says, oh, well, the return is forced, it's all whatever, it's persecution. I think that from what I've seen in the Andhra Pradesh context, I think it's definitely people who want to come back but don't really know how to come back, sort of facilitating these people's return because they want to come back to their roots, they want to come back to their ancestral faith. I think another major part of resistance is sort of, again, what you talked about, is sort of talking about sort of going, I mean, sort of being proactive in the sense that talking about Christianity, telling people, okay, this is what Christian theology is. This is sort of these are the intricacies of Christian theology, is sort of highlighting what are perceived maybe to be some of the negative parts of it. Because I think this is a major part of what, the Christian modus operandi is in Andhra Pradesh, because they will take, Hindu scriptures, they will take all these things, and they will sort of give a very selective read of some of these things, and they'll excerpt very, things in very devious ways, so as to kind of make this point, which is in many cases really not even in consonance with what the text itself is saying. But obviously, if people are really not aware of their own faith, it's very easy for them to fall for this sort of thing, which is very convenient, and that is really what does it from that intermediate stage where it's Jesus along with all the other Hindu gods to just Jesus. Because then it's like, okay, well, these are all the problems with Hinduism, so that's why you should get rid of it entirely, and you should stick with just with Jesus. So that's one of the major things, I think, also as part of resistance, is actually talking about Christianity proactively, and educating Hindus about Christianity. So if they're approached by these sort of missionization efforts and whatever, they're at least aware that's not their first brush with Christianity, is whatever they're being told by a Christian missionary. So I think the resistance part, very much, I think, is,
It's still
I think
nascent, but
it's still nascent. Yeah, absolutely. But it's definitely an ongoing phenomenon, I would say.
and the modus operandi is interesting in another way as well, because it works two ways. While the missionary tries to convert the uh, let's say non-intellectual classes, and we see it happening even in India today. If you see pick up videos of conversion from Punjab or any other state, you'll see that the missionary is saying, "Ki I will cure you of this disease." You'll have a plant on the stage, they will bring them, they will be acting very in a strange manner, and then this missionary will say, keep his hand on his head and say, in the name of Jesus, be cured, go away demon, and that person will then act normal. So even antics of that sort are still working on a large scale to convert people into Christianity. And my point on this was that while this is going on another side, they are demonizing the intellectual class, namely that is the Brahmins, and every sort of injustice and villainy has been thrust upon them. Brahmin patriarchy, the creation and sustenance of the entire caste system, and operation at the hands of the upper caste to the lower caste. On this point, I wanted to ask you, since this has been a major plank of missionaries and conversions, saying we are freeing you from this tyranny of caste system, does caste remain a factor even after conversions? Does when people from different varnas and different jatis of Hinduism convert back into Christianity, do they retain their castes? Is there a hierarchy? Is there discrimination, or and is there an added element of the missionary, the colonizer, at the top of this hierarchy? Just your thoughts on that.
No, I think it's a very interesting question, right? Because I think this is sort of one of the primary tools, as I mentioned, to sort of effectuate this sort of proselytization, particularly in Andhra Pradesh. Again, where I think for the majority, like I said, of the history of proselytization, Christian proselytization in Andhra Pradesh, it has been very much caste focused, and they've sort of, if you take sort of the colonial model of the caste pyramid, they've worked their way up, more or less, is what they've tried to do for the large part. And I think, again, that's very much sort of fanning the flames of caste discontent, is very much part of making that strategy work, because you're amplifying certain grievances, you're doing these things, and you're saying, okay, well, if you get into Christianity, this is not going to affect you any longer, and you're basically going to be free from all of this. The fact of the matter is, what they sort of ran into, I think, the Christian missionaries, to some extent, was that they realized that, okay, this is really not going away as fast as we had thought it would. And this was very much so. I remember one instance that I had come upon when I was working on the digital history on Gettysburg College missionaries in Andhra Pradesh. So there's one missionary, John Aberley, who was a Gettysburg College graduate, who went to India. He went to Guntur, and he was asked to officiate a a wedding um, by a native Christian convert. And he belonged to the Madhika subcaste, I believe. So the Madhika subcaste is one of the main two sort of sub varnas within sort of the Dalit umbrella in Andhra Pradesh. So the scheduled caste umbrella in Andhra Pradesh. So the two main sort of sub varnas are the Malas and the Madhigas. And there's been some conflict historically between those two groups, sort of within the Dalit umbrella, or the scheduled caste umbrella, right? And so he was going to officiate this Madhiga Christian's wedding, Madhiga Christian convert's wedding. And so he was, I believe, and he writes about this in his diary, he was stopped on the way by some Mala Christians, so of the other subvarna, who were not happy that he was officiating a wedding of the other subcaste, or the other subvarna. So that sort of shows you that this is not necessarily a religious framework entirely that they would have you believe. It's very much a social structure that was sort of reified colonially, right? And I have written about that separately in another paper that I've done, but that very much reified colonially, sort of used that to their advantage to, again, reinforce these divisions. So the boundaries definitely didn't disappear. I think one interesting thing that I look at in my paper is sort of in the 1970s, there was a woman by the name of Bibi Subbamma who came onto the scene. And so she was a convert, Christian convert. She converted from Hinduism. She belonged to the Jati Kamma Jati, which is that's an agrarian Varna, or Jati rather, in Andhra Pradesh, which is technically part of the Shudra Varna, but they're very economically prosperous. It's a very dominant group in Andhra Pradesh. So she belonged to that group, and by her own account, she was very pious as a young girl, and she used to participate in various vratas, and she was very religious, very devout. And so she was sort of under this impression that Christianity was this Dalit religion of the scheduled castes. This is not for people like us. And so she was like, okay, well, I'm going to stay away from this. I'm not going to go anywhere near this, right? Then she encountered, she says, a teacher of hers, who was a Brahmin teacher, who was also very much apparently into Christianity, and he read the gospel, and he did all of those things. And that apparently sort of, I guess, sent a message to her that, okay, well, maybe it's not just a lower caste thing. It's, maybe it's more of a universal thing, and maybe it's something that I can actually venture to go near, because I won't be ostracized for actually doing this. So again, it shows you how much of a Varna calculus, or how much of a calculus there is in sort of going about this whole thing. And so once she got into the picture, Subbamma, and she converted to Christianity, and she very much got into the Christian scene in Andhra Pradesh. And she wrote a book in the 1970s called New Patterns for Discipling Hindus, the Next Step in Andhra. And basically what she says there is that what we're saying, so what we as Christians are saying, about sort of a casteless church, and basically getting rid of caste entirely and saying, okay, everyone just intermingle, whether you be sort of scheduled caste and identity, or whether you're Kamma or Brahmin or whatever you are, and just sort of creating this universal identity. This is not going to work for India's social structure, and we're basically kneecapping ourselves if we tell ourselves that we're just going to restrict ourselves to the lower classes, because that's what we're going to do if we go with the approach that we've been going with. We have to sort of meet the population where they are. And basically what she says is that we can keep this Varna segregation within the church, and we don't have to necessarily assert that we're going to mix it all up and create this sort of homogenous church, because she thought that would not gain traction socially within Andhra Pradesh, which may or may not have been true. But the point being that the missionaries are willing to sort of go out of their way to reject Varna when it doesn't serve, when it does serve their interests, and when they realize that that's acting as an impediment, they're willing to say that, okay, well, fine, we're just going to uphold it, because ultimately what they want to do, Varna or no Varna, is they want to raise converts, and so by really any means necessary. So this is just really one strategic weapon that can be used, I think, one way, or sort of a strategic tool that can be used one way or another to serve that purpose.
Absolutely. And based on that anecdote that you have written in your paper, and B. Subbamma's conversion was in an ashram. So if you
I don't know that she herself converted in an ashram, but she was very prominent in the Christian ashram movement, which was basically. She was, and the Christian ashram movement, I mean, I think I'll talk about this briefly if you don't mind, because I think this is also really interesting based on what we had looked into earlier. The Christian ashram movement, which Subbamma was very prominent in ushering in, or she was definitely one of the forebearers of that movement in Andhra Pradesh, was basically, and so the nomenclature, I think itself is very interesting, because it's riffing on very overtly Hindu symbolism, right? And ashram being sort of a place of solitude, a place of spiritual sadhana, contemplation, and so sort of appropriating that for a Christian gathering. And it's basically sort of an all-female kind of residential gathering camp of sorts, where you would have women that converted to Christianity, and women that were sort of seeking to convert to Christianity. So they were kind of on the fence, and they were still sort of in the learning stage. And it was basically this I would say incubation chamber, where the conversion of these individuals would be facilitated through communal activity, prayer, bhajan. She very explicitly said bhajan. Again, I write about this in my paper. It's not gospel songs, it's not devotional music, it's bhajan. So again, this whole religion culture sort of dichotomy. Again, bhajan, bhaj in Sanskritam means to praise, right? To praise, to sort of, and it's a very explicitly Hindu term of devotional singing to propitiate the divine. So a form of bhakti, right? And so to appropriate that again to Christianity. So again, you're substituting in Jesus. If you're singing about Rama, Krishna, or any Hindu deity, now it's just Jesus substituted in there. And so you're doing these bhajans, you're doing these sort of social communal activities with other women. So it's an all-female space free from the male gaze, right? And that sort of creates an atmosphere of comfort, where you're with other women that you can talk about. It's like, oh, my husband might not want me to convert to Christianity, and then the other woman who's already converted to Christianity says, oh, I had that same problem, but I was able to overcome it, and now my entire family is in the church. And so it's a very, very overtly sort of Hindu symbolism to sort of facilitate that transition from Hinduism to Christianity. And the role of women, I think, is so important. I think this can't, be left unsaid, because, and this is such an important thing when you're looking at Christianity in Andhra Pradesh. The women, in our family structure, Hindu family structure, sort of Indian family structure, women are the linchpin of the family structure. There's no two ways about that, I think, sort of, and are very much in many ways sort of the bearers of culture in terms of inculcating that in children and all of these things. This is sort of what our traditional framework is, right? So the iconic sort of Jijabai and Shivaji, like this sort of thing. It's very iconic for us in our Samskriti, the role of the mother, the role of the woman of the household. And so obviously this is the person that in many cases is targeted by missionaries, because they realize that, okay, once this person is converted, once the woman of the household is converted, and basically the entire family is converted as a result, because of the enormous influence that individual has on the household. And I think in that sense, it's very much understandable why Subbamma was focusing on women specifically through the Christian ashrams. And again, it's so interesting, because Subbamma was also making this argument that, wearing the bottu, right? And we call it bottu in Telugu, but wearing the tilakam basically between, sort of and she basically said, this is a beauty mark, right? This is no religious significance, which is completely false, right? It absolutely has religious significance, right? In terms of activating the Agnya Chakra, and there is a religious significance to it. But basically, she said, okay, why are we as Christians saying that it's wrong to wear the botto when it's nothing more than a beauty mark? So again, she's condemning those who are arguably more quote unquote extreme in her faith, who are basically, sort of overcorrecting in her view, and saying that, oh, we want to banish all symbols of Hinduism entirely. And she's saying, okay, if you take this sort of approach, we are never going to get anywhere with the larger Hindu masses. You need to at least be more accommodating at the beginning. And then, whatever happens afterward is going to happen. Again, as I'm saying, it's all, an intermediate step. I don't think a lot of that is permanent. I don't think Subbamma really won out on this one, though, if you look at Andhra Pradesh today, because you can usually sort of figure out, whether a woman is Hindu or Christian, based on the fact, whether she's wearing the sort of the botto or not, because the overwhelming majority of Christian women now are eschewing that. So I think she's failed in that respect, fortunately or unfortunately. But I think it's very interesting to sort of look at that the role of women. Absolutely.
It is said, right, ki if you convert a woman, if you educate a woman, you educate an entire generation, and that adage has been very well put to use by them. Uh, just on this aspect of secularization of religion, how they have, and it's a perfect example of cultural appropriation that you cited, right? And I wouldn't say that Subhamma has failed. I would rather say ki she kind of predicted this will happen, but to ease their way into it, probably she had endorsed wearing the book.
Yeah.
But yes, Ji- so uh, thank you, Vivek. This is the first of our conversations on Christianity. This podcast focus on the aspects of Christian conversion in Andhra Pradesh and the elements that they use and the entire flow how it occurred in Andhra Pradesh, the conversion tactic. We'll have further conversations on Christianity, how it spread in India, how it is spreading right now in Northeast, and what is their modus operandi, what would be a proper Purva Paksha on it. But in this conversation, we are thankful to Vivek. Thank you, Vivek. I hope that you keep writing on this topic and you spread the word even more wider and wider.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciated the opportunity to talk to you about this very important topic today.
Thank, thank you. So with that, we'll conclude this session and we'll see you all again in the next episode. Thank you.